My name is Natalie Wilson, and 6 months ago, my husband, Ryan, died in a terrible train accident. At 34, I became a widow, struggling to raise our 10-year-old daughter, Emma, alone. The $250,000 apartment we'd worked so hard for was our only financial security left. I never imagined my own father would demand I give it to my sister, Melanie, his favorite child. When I refused, he said I'd regret it. But nothing prepared me for returning home to find Emma sobbing with red marks on her neck, telling me Grandpa had choked her. This story, however, doesn't begin with that horror. It begins with love, with the quiet, steady building of a life that I thought was strong enough to withstand anything. Ryan and I met during my second year of college. I was studying nursing, and he was in engineering school. We literally bumped into each other at the campus coffee shop, a collision that sent my latte cascading over a stack of his structural analysis textbooks. His initial shock melted into a slow smile that made the corners of his kind eyes crinkle. He had this infectious laugh that could light up a room, a warmth that drew people in. Coming from the chilly, conditional affection of my own family, his easy warmth felt like coming home. He insisted on buying me a replacement coffee, which turned into our first date, and from that day forward, we were rarely apart. He was my steady place in a turning world. My family dynamic had always been a confusing dance of shifting expectations. I was the responsible one, the one who studied hard for B's that were met with questions about why they weren't A's. My younger sister, Melanie, was the effervescent one, the golden child whose C's were celebrated as proof of her artistic, unburdened spirit. When I won second place in a state science competition, my father's first question was, "Who beat you?" When Melanie entered a local art show and didn't place, she was praised for her courage to participate. Ryan was the first person to see this dynamic for what it was. "It's not a reflection of you, Nat," he'd say, holding my hand. "It's a reflection of them. Nothing you do will ever be enough because the game is rigged." With him, I found the strength to build boundaries, to limit the visits and phone calls that always left me feeling drained and inadequate. After graduation, we moved to Madison, Wisconsin, a city that felt like a fresh start. We rented a tiny one-bedroom apartment, scrimping and saving every penny. Ryan took a job as an engineer with the Regional Railway, a career he loved for its precision and logic. I started as a nurse at the local hospital, drawn to the quiet satisfaction of caring for others. Our date nights were often just cooking dinner together and watching old movies on our lumpy, second-hand couch, but we were deliriously happy. 3 years later, during a simple picnic at the park where we'd had our third date, he proposed with a simple ring he'd saved for months to buy. My yes was the easiest word I'd ever spoken. Our wedding was small, a celebration with friends who felt more like family than my own. My parents and Melanie claimed the drive was too far, a flimsy excuse that barely concealed their disapproval of Ryan, the man who had, in their eyes, stolen me away from their sphere of influence. When I discovered I was pregnant with Emma, our determination to build a secure life doubled. Ryan worked overtime, and I picked up night shifts, our shared exhaustion fueled by a common dream. By the time Emma was born, we had saved enough for a down payment on a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood with tree-lined streets and a highly rated elementary school. It wasn't grand, but it was ours. That $250,000 property wasn't just an asset. It was a testament to every sacrifice, every late night, every dream we had poured into our future. Emma became the sun around which our world revolved. She had Ryan's gentle eyes and my quiet determination. Watching him with her was my greatest joy. He would spend hours constructing elaborate blanket forts in the living room or patiently explaining the physics of a model train. He never missed a school play or a parent-teacher conference. We were careful with our money, living well within our means. It was Ryan who insisted we both take out life insurance policies. "Just in case, Nat," he'd said, a phrase that now echoes with a tragic irony. The policy was designed to cover our mortgage, ensuring that if the unthinkable happened, the survivor and Emma would at least have their home. The cruelest irony of all is that the very trains he dedicated his life to making safe were what took him from us. A catastrophic signaling failure, a collision in the pre-dawn fog. The call came while I was at work. In an instant, my world fractured. The funeral was a blur of hushed voices and hollow condolences. My family was there, of course. I remember my father commenting on the modest size of the gathering, my mother fussing over my appearance, suggesting I should have worn more makeup to hide the grief. Melanie offered a perfunctory hug, her eyes already scanning the room, assessing. After they left, the silence of the apartment was a physical weight, pressing down on me. For weeks, Emma didn't speak. She would sit by the window, her small face pressed against the glass, watching for her father's car. The nights were the worst, filled with a cycle of soft sobs and startled awakenings from nightmares. I moved through my days on autopilot. Wake Emma, pack her lunch, go to work, pick her up, make dinner, read a bedtime story, cry silently in the shower, repeat. The life insurance paid for the funeral and cleared the mortgage, a single, stark financial blessing in a sea of devastation. For 3 months, we existed in this suspended state of grief, learning to navigate the geography of a world without Ryan. I thought we had already endured the worst. I was wrong. The worst was yet to come, and it would arrive wearing the familiar faces of my own family. It was a Sunday afternoon in April when the doorbell rang. Emma was in her room, quietly working on a school project, and I was folding laundry, finding a strange comfort in the mundane, repetitive task. I opened the door to find my parents and Melanie on the welcome mat, their arrival unannounced. "Natalie, dear, you look dreadful," my mother said, kissing the air beside my cheek as she swept past me into the living room. My father followed with a grunt that passed for a greeting, immediately settling into what had been Ryan's favorite armchair. "We've been worried," my father began, his tone accusatory. "You've been isolating yourself and the girl. It's not healthy." I bit back the urge to point out their months of near silence. "We're managing," I said, my voice tight. "Emma is in therapy. My friends check in." My mother surveyed the apartment, her gaze lingering on a small, faint water stain on the ceiling from a leak we'd had fixed weeks ago. "This place is so small for you too," she said with a sigh. "And all these little problems." "It's our home," I replied, a protective instinct flaring. "It's filled with memories of Ryan." My father cleared his throat, leaning forward. "That's actually what we came to talk to you about, Natalie." "The apartment." A cold knot formed in my stomach. "What about it?" "Your sister is pregnant," my mother announced, beaming at Melanie as if presenting a prize. "With twins. Isn't it wonderful? They're going to need more space." Melanie placed a hand on her still flat stomach, offering a demure, practiced smile. "Jason and I are thrilled, of course, but our little rental is bursting at the seams. We don't know where we'll put 2 cribs." I offered a numb congratulations, my mind struggling to connect the dots. My father made the connection for me. "We think you should sign the apartment over to Melanie," he stated, his voice devoid of emotion. "She and her family need it more than you do." The words were so stunningly audacious that for a moment, I could only stare. "Excuse me." "It's the logical solution," my mother chimed in, her tone briskly practical. "This place is paid off, thanks to Ryan's insurance. You and Emma can easily find a small place to rent, maybe move back closer to us. Melanie has 2 babies on the way. You have to think of family." "I am thinking of my family," I said, my voice a raw whisper. "I have a daughter who just lost her father. This apartment, this home, is the only stability she has left." My father's expression hardened into a familiar mask of disappointment. "Don't be so selfish, Natalie. That's always been your problem. Your sister needs this." The injustice of it ignited something in me, a spark of defiance I hadn't felt in months. "I have a family too," I said, rising to my feet, my hands trembling. "This is Emma's home. This is her security for the future Ryan and I built for her. You're being overly dramatic, my mother sniffed. Children are resilient. Emma will adjust. The conversation was a dizzying echo of my childhood. The bicycle I had saved my allowance for, which was given to Melanie because she needed the exercise. The modest college fund that had been depleted to pay for Melanie's expensive dance lessons, an investment in her future. It was always Melanie's wants framed as needs, and my needs framed as selfish desires. This isn't about Melanie's needs, I said, the realization landing with a heavy thud. This is about Melanie wanting something that's mine. Again. On cue, Melanie's eyes filled with tears. That's not fair, Nat. We're really struggling. You have all this space. Space that my husband and I paid for with our own hard work, I countered, my voice gaining strength. Ryan wanted this home to be Emma's inheritance. Her safety net. My father stood, his large frame towering over me in a posture of intimidation I knew all too well. Your husband is gone, Natalie. It's time to think about the living. Emma is living, I said, my voice shaking but firm. And this is her home. I am not giving it away. His face flushed a dark, angry red. After everything we have done for you. What? I interrupted, the single word a dam breaking against a lifetime of swallowed resentments. What have you done for me? When Ryan died, you sent a card. When my daughter was so lost in grief she couldn't speak, you were nowhere to be found. Now you show up and demand her home. You ungrateful, he started, but stopped as Emma appeared in the hallway, her small face clouded with worry. Mom, she asked, her voice tentative. It's okay, sweetheart, I said, softening my tone for her. Go back to your room. I'll be there in a minute. Once she was gone, my father's voice dropped to a low, menacing whisper. This isn't over. You've always been difficult, but this is a new low. There are consequences for this kind of selfishness. Are you threatening me? I asked, aghast. I'm reminding you that family helps family, he replied, his eyes cold. And right now, you're not acting like one. My mother stood, smoothing her silk blouse. Just think about it, Natalie. Do the right thing. They left, leaving a wake of cold fury and the lingering scent of my mother's expensive perfume. I stood frozen in the center of the living room, Ryan's absence a gaping wound. He would have known what to do. He would have stood beside me, a solid, unshakable wall. Emma crept back into the room. Are Grandma and Grandpa mad at us? I pulled her into a fierce hug, burying my face in her hair. No, baby. They're just upset about grown-up things. You don't have to worry about it. But I was worried. I had stood up to my father in a way I never had before, and I knew him well enough to know he would not let it go. I just never imagined how far he would go to make me pay for my defiance. The psychological warfare began the next day. My phone became a conduit for their campaign, a relentless stream of messages from my parents, my sister, and soon, a network of extended family members I hadn't heard from in years. Your father is so hurt by your selfishness, my mother texted. Those poor babies deserve a safe home, wrote an aunt who had never even met Emma. Melanie's messages were a masterclass in guilt tripping. I don't know how we'll manage now. Jason is talking about taking a second job. I lie awake at night worrying about my babies. I blocked their numbers, but the messages would come from different phones or pop up on social media, a coordinated assault on my resolve. A week later, I met my friend Amanda for coffee. She had been my lifeline since Ryan's death, the one who sat with me in silence, brought groceries when the thought of a store was overwhelming, and listened without judgment. They want you to give your paid-off apartment to your sister, she said, her spoon clattering against her saucer. That is certifiably insane, Nat. They make it sound like it's my moral duty, I said, staring into my cup. Like I'm some kind of monster for wanting to keep a roof over my grieving child's head. Amanda reached across the table, her hand covering mine. You are not the one who is broken here. This is classic manipulation. Have you talked to a lawyer? The suggestion spurred me to action. I made an appointment with a family attorney, a kind-faced man named Michael Dawson, who listened patiently as I recounted the story. Legally, they have absolutely no claim, he assured me. The deed is in your name. You are under no obligation to gift your property to anyone, family or not. His words were a balm, a confirmation that I wasn't being unreasonable. But the pressure from my family only intensified. My father escalated his tactics, calling my workplace. My nursing supervisor, Janet, pulled me aside one morning, her expression troubled. "Natalie, I had a very strange call from your father," she said. "He was expressing concern about your emotional stability since Ryan's death, suggesting you might not be fit for duty. Is everything all right?" Heat rushed to my face. I explained the situation, my voice trembling with a mixture of shame and anger. Janet was supportive, but the seed had been planted. I felt the subtle shift in the way my colleagues looked at me, the whispers that quieted when I entered the break room. My father had managed to tarnish my reputation at the one place where I felt competent and in control. The stress began to affect Emma. Her teacher called to report that she was withdrawn in class, chewing on her nails again, a nervous habit she'd long since outgrown. One evening, I found her on Ryan's side of our bed, clutching one of his old sweatshirts. "Grandpa called me," she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "At school. He said we might have to move away from Daddy's house." My blood ran cold. "He called you at school?" "During recess," she confirmed, tears welling. "He said you were being selfish and that I needed to convince you to do the right thing for Aunt Melanie's babies." "I don't want to leave, Mom." A protective fury, fierce and white-hot, surged through me. "We are not going anywhere, Emma. I promise you." The next morning, I was at the school office, revoking all contact privileges for my parents and sister, my hand steady as I signed the new emergency forms. The isolation deepened. Some friends began to drift away, uncomfortable with the family drama. My cousin, once a close confidant, sent a text that read, "Maybe you should think about what's best for everyone, not just yourself." The narrative my parents were spinning was working. Doubt began to creep in during the quiet, lonely hours of the night. Was it worth it? Maybe we should just move. Maybe Emma would be better off away from all this conflict. But then I would remember Ryan's voice, calm and steady in my memory. "Never let them make you doubt your own mind, Nat. You're not the one with the problem." I scheduled an appointment with Emma's therapist, Dr. Bennett, laying out the whole sordid story. For a child processing the traumatic loss of a parent, she said gently, stability is paramount. Her home is her anchor right now. Uprooting her, especially under these coercive circumstances, could set her healing back significantly. Her professional validation solidified my resolve. I sent one final, clear message to my parents and sister. "The apartment belongs to Emma and me. This matter is closed. Any further contact will be considered harassment and will be handled by my attorney." My father's response was a single, chilling text, "You have made your choice. Remember that choices have consequences." I showed the message to Michael Dawson, who advised me to document everything and consider a restraining order. But I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that a piece of paper wouldn't stop him. I had to fight him, publicly and unequivocally, for the first time in my life. I had no idea how swift and how brutal his retaliation would be. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, in the middle of a chaotic shift. A multi-car pileup had flooded the ER, and we were short-staffed. Janet asked if I could stay for the evening shift. I hesitated, my first thought, as always, being Emma. My usual after-school sitter was unavailable. As I was about to decline, my phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "Heard you need someone to watch Emma. We can pick her up. It would be good for her to spend some time with her grandparents." I stared at the message, a cold suspicion warring with my desperation. After weeks of hostile silence, this offer felt too convenient, too calculated. But Janet was looking at me expectantly, The ER was in chaos, and I was out of options. Perhaps this was an olive branch. Perhaps they had finally accepted my decision. Against my better judgment, against the blaring alarm of my intuition, I agreed. Just for tonight, I texted back. She needs to be in bed by 9. She has school. Of course, dear, came the immediate reply. We know how to care for our own granddaughter. Hours later, deep into the evening shift, my phone vibrated. A text from Emma. Mom, please come home. 3 simple words, but the formal tone sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through me. I called her phone. It went straight to voicemail. I called my parents' house. No answer. Panic clawed at my throat. I found Janet, my face pale. I have to go. Something is wrong with my daughter. The drive home was a frantic blur. I ran red lights, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The apartment was dark when I pulled up, my parents' car nowhere in sight. I fumbled with my keys, bursting through the door into the silent darkness. Emma? I called out, my voice echoing in the still air. A small, hiccuping sob came from her bedroom. I found her curled in a tight ball on her bed, her face streaked with tears, clutching the small stuffed rabbit Ryan had won for her at a fair years ago. Honey, what is it? What happened? Where are Grandma and Grandpa? She looked up, and my world stopped. Angry, finger-shaped bruises were blooming on the delicate skin of her neck. Her scalp was raw and red in patches, and a small, terrifying clump of her brown hair lay on the pillow beside her. Grandpa got mad, she whispered, her voice raspy and broken. He said I was being disrespectful. Just like you. My vision tunneled as she recounted the horror, her small words painting a scene of unspeakable betrayal. They hadn't brought her to our apartment. They had taken her to their house, where my father had immediately begun grilling her about me, about lawyers, about the apartment. When Emma, frightened and confused, had asked to go home, he had exploded. He had grabbed her by the throat, shoving her against a wall, hissing that she was an ungrateful child, just like her mother. When she struggled, he had yanked her hair, tearing it from her scalp. He said it was my fault you wouldn't give them our home, she sobbed. He said you were teaching me to be selfish, and he had to teach me a lesson. My mother had stood by and watched, telling Emma to stop being so dramatic. My sister, Melanie, had also been there, her face pale, but she had said nothing, done nothing. It was only when Emma managed to break free and lock herself in a bathroom that she had been able to text me from the emergency phone I'd given her. Eventually, they had driven her home in a tense, furious silence, dropping her off with a final warning, "Don't you dare make things worse by lying to your mother." As she spoke, a cold, clear rage settled over me. I took my phone and, with trembling hands, documented the evidence, the fingerprint bruises, the scratches, the patches of missing hair. Then I called 911. While we waited, my phone lit up with messages from my parents. Emma is overreacting. I barely touched her. This is what happens when a child isn't disciplined. And then, the one that sealed their fate, if you had just been reasonable about the apartment, none of this would have happened. I saved it. It was a confession. The police officer who arrived, a man named Keith, was calm and professional. He took my statement, his eyes lingering on the photos on my phone. "You'll need to take her to the ER," he said gently. "Get her checked out and have them document the injuries officially." As I buckled a silent, shivering Emma into her car seat, he asked, "Ma'am, do you have a safe place to go tonight?" In situations like this, the perpetrators sometimes return. The question was a shock. This was our sanctuary. Now it felt tainted, unsafe. "Mom," Emma whispered from the back seat, her voice small but clear. I recorded it, on my tablet. When Grandpa was yelling, I pressed the record button, like you showed me for my video diary. My hands froze on the steering wheel. My brilliant, terrified, resourceful little girl. In the midst of her terror, she had thought to create evidence, knowing, perhaps instinctively, that a child's word against a grandfather's might not be enough. "You are the bravest person I know, Emma Wilson," I told her, my voice thick with a love so fierce it was a physical pain in my chest. As we drove towards the hospital, towards the fluorescent lights and the clinical language that would attempt to define this horror, I made a silent vow. No one would ever harm my child again. The apartment, the arguments, the family drama, it all faded into insignificance. The only thing that mattered now was Emma. And the recording on her tablet, I suspected, was about to change everything. The ER was a sterile, quiet bubble after the chaos of the evening. A compassionate triage nurse named Beth took one look at Emma's bruised neck and immediately led us to a private room. The words she spoke into the phone, suspected non-accidental trauma, were a clinical label for an ugly truth. My father had assaulted my child. Dr. Reynolds, a doctor with a gentle touch and serious eyes, began her examination. "I need to document everything, Emma," she explained softly. "This is very important to make sure we have a record of what happened." Emma sat with a stoicism that broke my heart, allowing the doctor to photograph her injuries. When asked to describe the events, her voice was small but steady. "Grandpa was mad because Mom won't give Aunt Melanie our apartment," she said. "He said he had to teach me not to be selfish like Mom." The doctor's face remained professional, but I saw the flash of anger in her eyes. Emma was sent for X-rays to check for any deeper damage, and I was left alone in the room with a crushing weight of guilt. I had made the choice. I had trusted them. I had put my daughter in harm's way. Officer Keith arrived to take a formal statement. "The DA's office is taking this very seriously," he said. I handed him Emma's tablet, wrapped carefully in a scarf. "She recorded it," I said, my voice hoarse. "I haven't been able to listen to it." He placed it in an evidence bag with care. "This is significant," he said. "This could be everything." The X-rays showed no fractures, but Dr. Reynolds diagnosed a concussion from where she'd been shoved against the wall. We left the hospital close to midnight, armed with prescriptions and paperwork that documented the assault in cold, medical terms. My neighbor, Sarah, had texted earlier, having seen the police at my parents' house. Her immediate offer of a safe haven was a light in the darkness. I carried a sleeping Emma into Sarah's spare room, a refuge from a world that had suddenly become terrifying. The next morning, I drove to the police station. Detective Jennifer Morales, a sharp woman with an empathetic gaze, met me in a small, windowless room. "The audio is 18 minutes long," she warned me. "It is difficult to hear." She pressed play. My father's voice filled the room, a familiar blend of self-righteousness and menace. I heard Emma's small, frightened replies. I heard the thud of her body hitting the wall, her gasp of pain. I heard her begging him to stop as he accused her of being poisoned by me. And then, the most damning part, his voice clear and angry. "If your mother had just signed over that apartment like she was told, none of this would be happening. This is her fault. You tell her that." The recording captured her escape, her terrified, ragged breaths behind the locked bathroom door, and his furious pounding. When it ended, silent tears were streaming down my face. "Ms. Wilson," Detective Morales said softly, "this is one of the clearest documented cases of child abuse and coercion I have ever seen. We are arresting your father today. Your mother will be charged as an accessory." She informed me an emergency restraining order was already being processed. As I was leaving, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Natalie? This is Thomas, Melanie's husband. I need to talk to you. Please." Not all of us are monsters. The unified front my family had presented was beginning to fracture under the weight of an undeniable truth, captured by a brave 10-year-old girl. The days that followed were a blur of legal meetings and therapy sessions. The DA's office, led by a formidable prosecutor named Jennifer Harris, moved swiftly. The recording was their cornerstone. My parents, through their expensive lawyer, launched a smear campaign, painting me as an unstable widow manipulating a property dispute. The local news picked up the story, and for a while, our lives became a public spectacle. But for every friend who backed away, two more stepped forward. Amanda organized a meal train. Colleagues at the hospital quietly covered my shifts for court dates. Emma's school, led by a wonderful counselor named Madison Taylor, created a bubble of safety around her. Then, the cracks in my father's world began to widen. His estranged brother, my Uncle Robert, called me out of the blue. "I heard what Charles did," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm not surprised. He did the same to your mother years ago. I saw it. That's why I cut ties." He offered to testify, providing old police reports that had never resulted in charges. Then, I returned the call from Thomas, my sister's husband. "Melanie is terrified," he admitted. "Of your father, of going to jail. He pushed this whole apartment thing." She was too scared to stand up to him. "I'm trying to convince her to tell the truth to the DA." A few days later, she did. Her testimony, corroborating Emma's account and detailing a lifetime of my father's psychological control, was the final nail in his coffin. Faced with incontrovertible evidence and a crumbling support system, he was offered a plea deal. He would plead guilty to all charges to avoid a public trial. The sentencing was a quiet, somber affair. I chose to speak not out of vengeance, but for the record. I described the trust that had been broken, the safety that had been shattered. But the most powerful voice in the room was Emma's. She stood before the judge, her own handwritten statement trembling in her hands, and read in a clear, strong voice. "When my grandpa hurt me," she began, "I was scared no one would believe me. The worst part wasn't the pain. It was knowing that someone who was supposed to love me could hurt me just because he was mad at my mom. I don't think people should hurt kids. Ever." My father was sentenced to 5 years in prison. My mother received probation and mandatory counseling. The permanent restraining order was granted. It was over. In the aftermath, the path to healing was not straight. I met with Melanie and Thomas. There were tears and halting apologies. I couldn't offer forgiveness. Not yet, but for the first time, I saw my sister not just as a rival, but as another victim of our father's manipulation. It was a fragile beginning. The apartment, the symbol of our struggle, no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt haunted by the conflict. With Emma's blessing, we decided to sell it. The market had been kind, and we used the proceeds to buy a small house in a new neighborhood, a place with a yard and a big oak tree, a place with no ghosts. An unexpected inheritance from Ryan's estranged grandmother, a woman we'd never met, felt like a final gift from him, a cushion that allowed me to take time off work to focus on Emma. We began to build a new life, a chosen family of friends like Amanda, of new relatives like Uncle Robert, of supportive professionals. The wounds were still there, but they were no longer gaping. They were becoming scars, reminders of what we had survived. One evening, almost a year after the assault, Emma and I were sitting on our new porch swing, watching the fireflies begin to dot the twilight. She was quiet for a long time, then she leaned her head on my shoulder. "Mom," she said softly, "I'm not scared anymore." Her words were the greatest gift she could have given me. In that moment, I knew we had truly won. We had not just survived, we were healing. We were free. The fight hadn't been about an apartment. It had been about the right to live without fear, to define our own family, to protect our own peace. And in the quiet of that evening, wrapped in the safety of the new life we had built, I knew we had found it. Our story was painful, but it was also a story of resilience, of a mother's love, and of a little girl's incredible courage. It was the story of how we found our way back to the light.